Hello everyone, my name is Parusha and this is my final presentation for LSO217KBB, the short story with Professor Pedram Lalbuks. And for my final, I chose a short story that is only about 20 pages long but has an haunted American literature for more than 130 years. The story is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, first published in 1992. So I picked this story because of the everything we read through this semester. So it's the one I could not stop thinking about, like how it closed the book. So it reads like a ghost story, but by the end basically you realize the real haunting is not just a ghost at all, but it is a marriage, a medical system, and a whole society that refuse to listen to a woman who is clearly asking for help. So moving back to the next slide. So yes. So why I chose it. So there are basically mainly three reasons this story grabbed me. So first, the voice feels like incredibly modern, even though Gilman's wrote it in 1892. The question it asks about the women's autonomy, about the mental health, about the being dismissed by the people who love you, feel like they could have been written this year. Secondly, it's an amazing example of how much a power a short story could hold. In under 6,000 words, Gilman reshaped how literature portrays mental illness and women's inner lives. And the third one is it's like a perfect fusion of two genders. I love it's gothic horror and it's a feminist protest at the exact same time. On the surface, a creepy tale about the haunted room, underneath one of the most powerful feminist works of the 19th century. So now let's talk about the author's background. To really understand this story, you should have understand the Charlotte Perkins Gilman's because the yellow wallpaper is almost like autobiographical. So Gilman was born in 1860 in the Hartford, Connecticut. Her father abandoned the family when she was young. So she grew up in very poverty and was largely self-educated. She became a writer, a lecturer, and a sociologist, and one of the most important American feminist thinker of her time. But here is the part that matters most of this story. In 1885, Gilman had a daughter, and afterwards she fell into a severe postpartum depression. And afterwards she fell into a depression. The most famous doctor in America so far called the nervous disorder at the time was Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, shown here in the slide. He prescribed her what calling the rest cure. This meant total bed rest, constant feeding, no visitors, no intellectual stimulation, and most importantly, she was absolutely forbidden to write, to read, or to work. Gilman later said the rest cure nearly drove her insane. She came, in her own words, to very age of mental ruin. So she did something radical. She rejected the cure. She left her marriage and she went back to writing. So in 1892, she published The Yellow Wallpaper and she later claimed that she sent a copy directly to Dr. Weir Mitchell himself. So this is not just a short story. This is a letter bomb basically. So now move back to the next slide, which is about the summary of the story. So let me go through you what happens. So the story is told in a secret diary, entries by an unnamed narrator, and that is already significant. She does not even get a name. She and her husband John, who is a physician, have rented a colonial mansion for a summer. John has diagnosed her with what he calls a temporary nervous depression after the birth of their baby, and he prescribed the rest cure. He puts her in an upstairs nursery room. It has a barred window, a bed nailed to the floor, and a hideous peeling yellow wallpaper. She is not allowed to write, not allowed her to see her baby very much, not allowed to visitors, and even she tried to tell John that she is not getting better. But he calls her, listen, little girl, You blessed a goose and tells her to just trust him because he's a doctor. So, with nothing else to occupy her mind, she starts staring at the yellow wallpaper, and slowly she begins to see patterns within the patterns. And she figured out of a woman crowned behind the bars trying to get out. Her obsession grows. She stops sleeping and she starts creeping around the room in secret. So, on a final day, she locks herself inside. She tears the wallpaper off and to free the woman, and she begins crawling around the room on her hands and knees. Then John breaks down the door. He sees her. He faints, and the story ends with the narrow crawling over the unconscious husband's body, saying like, I have to get out at last in spite of you, Jane, and I have pulled out most important paper, so you cannot put me back. It is the most unsettling ending in American literature. So there are four things I genuinely love about this story. First, the unreliable narrator, because everything is filtered through the secret diary. We got to feel her like unraveling from the inside. The sentence got shorter, the gaps get longer, reality starts to slip, and because we trapped in her head, we sleep with her. Second, the wallpaper itself as a living symbol, it's not just a decor, it becomes a mirror of her mind, chaotic, suffocating, and a full of trapped woman that nobody else can see. Third, the quiet irony. John is not a villain twirling mustache. He thinks he loves her. He calls her a pet name, insists she is getting better. Meanwhile, we watched her disappear and see restraint in what makes it terrifying. And the fourth, the final image. The narrator creeping over the painted husband. It is honor and victory at the exact same time. You do not even forget it. So now, the critical analysis, this is the heart of my presentation. My argument is this: Gilman used the tool of gothic fiction, confinement, a haunted room, a double woman, to expose the 19th century rest cure and patriarchal marriage as a medical system that pathologized women's dishonest. I want to support this with three scholarly voices. So, first, Sandra Gilbert and Susan Guber. In their landmark feminist study in Mad Woman in the Attic, they argue that the woman the narrator sees behind the wallpaper is actually her own imprisoned creative self. Of the famous ending, they write that John has been a quote temporarily defeated or at least a momentarily stunned end quote. But I am quoting them directly here. Quote more significantly are the madwoman's own imaging and creations, mirage of her health and freedoms, and her quote. So in their reading. So when the narrator tears the paper down, it's not just a madness, it's the act of authorical self deliberation. She is writing her own story at last. Secondly, the Paula Trichler in Tulsa Studies in Women Literature with the really powerful point about the diagnosis itself. The Tricher writes the quote, diagnosis is the sentence in that it's a simultaneously a linguistic entity, a declaration or a judgment, and a plan for action in the real world, end quote. That is from the page 70. Think about the double meaning of the word sentence. A sentence is something to judge passes. A sentence is also something you write. A John diagnosis is both. It's a verdicts and control her body, and it's also a piece of language that takes away her to speak for herself. And the third is Treichler on her ending. She reads the final scene as a paradoxical victory. I am quoting again. As she steps over the patriarchal body, she leaves the authoritative voice of diagnosis in shambles at her feet. Her new mode of speaking, an unlawful language, escapes the sentence imposed by particularly. End quote, and that is from the page 74. In other words, the narrator's madness is actually a brand new language. She rejected John diagnostic vocabulary words like nervous, hyperical, fancy, and she replaced it with her own. So put these three voices together and you get something powerful. The story is gothic, yes, but the haunting is patriarchy. The ghost is silenced woman and the exorcism is the act of writing itself. So now move back now move to the scholarly sources. These are my full APA 7th edition references: Gilbert and Gubar, Treichler, Scholter's The Female Melody, and the Gilman's text itself from the Project Gutenberg. So next move to the why should you read it? Why should you read this story? So the reason one is it's a like masterclass in the first person voice. You will not find a more intimate, more chilling narrator in an American literature. You will feel her like mind blending in a real time, and there is really nothing else like it. Reason number two, the story actually changed the world. It helped end the rest cure as a medical practice, and it remains the foundational text for the female criticism, for disability studies, and for the mental health advocacy. Reading it is not just a literature, it is history. And here are my discussion questions for you. Is the narrator's final act a moment of deliberation, a total collapse, or a both of the exact same time? And what does it say about the society where the woman can only accept through the madness? I honestly do not think there is one right answer, and that's what makes me worth about. So let's move on to our next slide, which is key insights. So to wrap up, here are the three insights I am taking away from my this story. So the first is silence is the real honor. The terror in this story does not come from ghost. It comes from being unheard by her husband, by a doctor, by a whole society. Second, writing is survival. Gilman turned her own trauma into art and inside the story. The forbidden act of writing becomes the narrator's last refuge. This is something really powerful about a story, where the act of telling it is itself the rebellion. And the third is the story that still diagnoses us. More than 130 years later, the question is about who gets believed, who gets treated, and who gets silenced our painful current, basically. And finally, this is the yellow wallpaper, a small short story about the yellow room. That in the end, it really about a woman who has been told she was imagining it. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day, sir. Thank you.